Welcome to the Humane Mind, and if you couldn't tell by the title of this video, I will be talking about Trump's recent ban of trans people serving in the US military. This topic is a little more timely than my usual content, and that's because I like to let my ideas simmer. I don't want to send out something that is half-baked or any arguments that aren't well thought out or well researched. But I don't think my content in this video is going to be half anything. First off, I'm an 8-year veteran of the US Air Force. I currently have a brother that is serving. My father served in the Army, as well as an uncle, an aunt that was an officer in the Navy, and my grandfathers on both sides of my family served in the US Army as well. On Wednesday, July 26th, President Donald J. Trump announced that the US military would no longer accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity. Naturally, Twitter and YouTube have been ablaze with idiots claiming that this is a violation of trans rights. The New York Times, in an article and accompanying video, said that this contrasts strongly with Trump's original position on LGBT rights. Even some people on the skeptic side have voiced opinions that trans people should be allowed to serve if they are mentally and physically fit to perform their duties. And there are a surprising number of people who have stated that they should be allowed to serve as long as they are willing. The U.S. military is a prestigious institution and does not just accept every application, no matter how willing the person is to serve.
Boy, a lot of guys getting killed over there.
Rogers, Stephen.
Kinda makes you think twice about enlisted, huh?
Nope. Rogers. What'd your father die of?
Mustard gas. He was in the 107th Infantry. I was hoping I could be assigned.
Your mother?
She was a nurse in a TB ward. Got hit. Couldn't shake it.
Sorry, son.
Look, just give me a chance.
You've been eligible on your asthma alone.
Is there anything you can do?
I'm doing it. I'm saving your life.
According to a Time article in 2014, approximately 71% of the 34 million 17 to 24-year-olds in the U.S. would not qualify for military service because of reasons related to health, physical appearance, and educational background, according to the Pentagon. In that same article, it stated that according to the Department of Defense, only 1% of young people are both eligible and inclined to talk to the military about potentially serving. Where is the public outcry for the 71% that are unable to serve for those reasons? Oh, I forgot that the trans community seems to be the left's current favorite oppressed group, at least until they've outlived their usefulness to the left, in which case they will be discarded in favor of the next victim status group. Now, when I was quoting from that Time article, I did use a slightly nerdier voice, but that was just to differentiate the words from the article from my regular nerdy speaking voice. The military can and does discriminate based on a variety of criteria that would otherwise be unacceptable or illegal for any other organization. You can be ineligible for military service based on hemorrhoids, gastrointestinal bypass, insufficient natural healthy teeth,
diabetes,
scurvy, limitations of motion, absence of one or more small toes, ingrown toenails, knee surgery. For women, you can be disqualified for pregnancy, genital herpes, HPV. For men, absence of both testicles can disqualify you. When it comes to height, men under 5 feet can't join. Women under 4'10" cannot join. Anyone over 6'8" cannot join. So LeBron James, yo dog, you're in. Yao Ming, you too tall to join. That's racist! You can also be disqualified for asthma, silicone breast implants, cleft lip or palate defects, allergies, head injuries that altered your personality, criminal history, suicidal behavior, acne, tattoos, warts, organ transplants, HIV, and sleep apnea. When Trump announced that transgender people would no longer be allowed to serve, many people were saying that this was treating them as less than human, that it was violating their rights. Now, does denying anyone entry into the U.S. military based on any of the conditions that I previously listed make them any less human or take away any rights from those people?
No, 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 no!
Some of those conditions would obviously make it more difficult for a person to do their job and may interfere with combat readiness. But a cleft lip, tattoos, acne, being too short or too tall, those particular conditions should have no bearing on a person's ability to hold a gun and fire it at the enemy. They do, however, affect the military's uniformity. Those particular standards are set in place to keep the military looking more uniform. They want the military to look as identical as possible. people. They want everyone to fit within a certain range. Additionally, height may come into play when trying to fit inside of a particular vehicle or craft. While people are up in arms currently about the trans, I haven't heard anybody raising the alarm about people having too many tattoos or tattoos in the wrong place and how they're people too and they have their rights to serve if they want to serve. When I was in the Air Force boot camp, anytime anyone stuck out from the group, anytime someone's uniform was out of order, anytime someone was out of step or not acting in the same way as everyone else, our drill instructors would chant this rhyme.
One of these things is not like the others. One of these things doesn't belong.
The entire purpose of boot camp was to get all of us to act together as a single unit, to get all of us to match. They wanted us to look and feel like one homogeneous group. Having extremely distinguished markings or appearance hinders the goal of making everyone similar. And what about HIV and
Diabetes.
Both of those conditions are treatable, and with consistent medication, a person with either condition can live a mostly normal life. So why would that bar them from military service? Well, when you think about the military life, something that should come to your mind but doesn't come to the mind of a civilian is deployments. When you are deployed, depending on where you are deployed, you may not have access to a pharmacy. You may not have access to medical treatment. You may not have access to more than a first aid kit for several months at a time. There is no guarantee that when you are deployed that you will have access to your medical treatment or be able to resupply. According to the NCBI, the average length of deployments, total number of months divided by the total number of deployments in all branches and components, was 7.7 months to 8.3 months for single deployers and 6.8 months for multiple deployers. This issue is further exacerbated when you think about prisoners of war. POWs are barely fed and are often mistreated by their captors. Do you honestly think that wardens who have no problem torturing their prisoners would consider insulin or HIV medication necessary? The third thing that I don't think civilians consider when they're looking at all of the conditions that would bar someone from entering the military is cost. The military pays for all medical expenses for their active duty members, which is why they deny people based on diagnosed pre-existing conditions. The U.S. military has an obligation to the taxpayers to not hire someone who is more expensive than they're worth. So outside of criteria that would limit a person's ability to do their job as they serve, I brought up how these conditions might inhibit or prohibit unit cohesion, could create issues for deployments or imprisonment status, and create unnecessary costs. In some of these cases, multiples of the reasons that I listed would be why that particular condition would disqualify someone from serving in the military. Still, for the condition of being trans, if only one of those reasons is valid to disqualify a trans person from serving in the military, that is all that is necessary, is one valid reason. What I've encountered for those people making the argument for trans people to serve in the military, rather than considering all of those reasons together, they tend to tackle them one at a time and say, see, this one doesn't apply, therefore trans people should be able to serve. And this is something that I've noticed not just in this particular debate, but in a lot of the arguments I get into. The opposition tends to view these reasons as connected by or statements instead of and statements. Now that is programmer terminology, and I'm going to take the time to explain the difference between the two, because that is how I logically think about these particular arguments. These are relatively easy concepts for anyone to understand, and I'll explain it with the following slide. For and statements, I've got 3 statement examples. Now the double equal sign is comparing the values of both objects on each side, in which case it's asking the question, does 1 equal 1? This is how you would read the first statement. Does 1 equal 1? And does 2 equal 2? And does 3 equal 3? And does 4 equal 4? What the computer would read out of that statement, if this was actually a legitimate programming language, it would return a value of true. This is true if you're using and logic or and statements to relate these. Statement number 2. Now it's exactly the same with one difference. For the second question, it's asking does 2 equal 0? So what that statement will do is it will return a false for the computer. And statement number 3, it's asking if any of those values are equal to 0. None of them is equal to 0, so the return will be false. And this is because 1 does equal 1, 2 does equal 2, blah, 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 blah. 1 does not equal 0, so on and so forth, all the way up to does 4 equal 0. So statement number 1, when it's processed by a computer, would return a value like this. True and true and true and true, therefore true. Statement 2 would return this. True and false and true, therefore false. For statement 1, every condition came back true, therefore the entire statement was true. But for statement 2, only one of them needs to come back as false for the entire statement to be false. And similarly, if all conditions are false, it's going to come back as a false. Hopefully I'm not losing anybody when I'm explaining this. For my OR examples, I have the exact same statements, with the exception that there is now an OR joining them all. So this would read, does 1 equal 1, or does 2 equal 2, or does 3 equal 3? So statement 1 is going to return a true. Now here's where it differs. Statement 2 is also going to return a true. Statement 3 will still return a false. And this is because statement 1 will process and result in true or true or true or true. The end result will be a return of true. Statement 2 will result in true or false or true, therefore true. I left that statement the same as the previous statement 2, and it still came back with a true. And again for statement 3, it's false or false or false or false, therefore false. To demonstrate more thoroughly the difference between ands and ors, I added a fourth statement. Does 1 equal 0, or does 2 equal 2, or does 3 equal 0, or does 4 equal 0? What the computer will interpret this to read would be something like false or true or false, therefore true. Only one of those criteria needs to be true in order for the entire statement to be true if they are all linked by OR statements. Sorry about that side tangent, but I assure you, it was relevant. The way this breaks down for the military would be like this. Are you able to do your job? And are you able to fit uniformly into the existing military structure? And are you able to endure a deployment or imprisonment? And are you worth what you are going to cost the military? A lot of people in favor of the trans community are stopping at that first question, and they're answering it in favor of the trans community. They're saying, yes, if I'm trans, there should be no reason that I shouldn't be able to perform my regular job. By stopping at just that first question and ignoring the rest, they're ignoring all of the things that are necessary of a person to be a good fit for military service. That is but one criteria for military service, and I have laid out at least 3 others that a person must be able to do in order to serve effectively in the military. There are others, I assure you. Those are just the 3 that I'm using in my video. So how could being trans negatively affect unit cohesion? Well, for starters, here's something that people who are pro-trans tend to overlook concerning this issue. There is no clear line of when someone is done transitioning. From my understanding about being trans, all it takes is stating that you are trans to be trans. I am not strawmanning anything here. Many people in the LGBT community have stated as such. 2 clear examples of this are Riley J. Dennis and Milo Stewart, both of whom were accepted into the trans community prior to disclosing that either of them was on hormone replacement therapy or that they had taken any steps to actually transition. All they had done at that point was state that they were trans. So all it takes to start transitioning is to just declare that you are trans. Now, where does that transition end? The answer from the LGBT community seems to be whenever that person chooses to end transition, that's when they're done transitioning. By that logic, for someone to be fully transitioned, all they should need to do is declare that they are trans and do nothing else. Or they could have hormone replacement therapy and go no further than that. Or they could have the reassignment surgeries, facial surgeries, hip surgeries, cartilage reduction, etc., etc. They could have every surgery currently available and still not be fully transitioned in their own mind. So where does the military draw the line? Because there doesn't seem to be a definitive, this is a fully trans person. The military needs clearly defined lines in order to establish any criteria one way or the other. If we draw that line on just hormone replacement therapy, how long into the HRT does a person need to be accepted in the military? 1 1 day, a week, 6 months, 3 years? What if after the 3-year mark, a transgender person still has the secondary characteristics of their biological sex? If the person was female to male, they would look like a woman wearing a man's uniform and thus being out of regulations. What form of a dress would someone meeting them for the first time know to use for this person? It is a requirement in the military to address officers as sir or ma'am depending on their gender. Having trans people serve will lead to instances like this. Airman, why did you just address me as ma'am when I'm obviously a sir? Sir, Airman Joseph reports as ordered. It was not obvious to me as you are at least a C-cup. So instead of going with an arbitrary time frame on HRT, should we just go with as soon as they are passable? What if that trans person never reaches passability? The entire notion of whether a trans person is passable or not is subjective to the individual. And there are some individuals which no matter how hard they try, they will still look like their biological sex no matter how much they do to themselves. Something else that I've noticed that civilians don't consider is that in basic, they separate flights based on male and female. And for some asinine reason, you are forced to shower with your flight in a large open shower room. There is a limit to the number of penises that I am comfortable with seeing. That number is 1. My own. Thanks to Basic, I exceeded that by about 40. As a side note, some genius in our flight decided that in order to keep people from spending too much time in the showers at Basic, that we should form a line and go through the shower heads like a car wash. This is so stupid. I could not make this up. This is an instance where reality was so much stranger than fiction. To their credit, despite it being completely idiotic, it kept me from spending more than 15 seconds in the shower when I had to. I would only go through about 2 or 3 shower heads and then leave immediately, even if I had shampoo in my hair or soap in my eyes or whatever, just because I would not risk bumping into a naked guy or having a naked guy bump into me. That entire shower story was anecdotal, I know, but it's ancillary to the point I'm trying to make here. You are going to see everyone on your flight naked whether you want to or not. Conversely, they are going to be seen naked whether they want to or not. I think that this would create a unique dilemma for transgender people who are already uncomfortable with their own bodies, which is the entire reason they're transitioning. For them, this would be a very jarring environment to try to build a cohesive unit around. Basic was the most stressful period of my entire life because you're dealing with little or no sleep, rigorous intense exercise, lots of studying, constantly being yelled at, being forced to live in close quarters with people that you don't like or who don't like you. Add on top of that the sword of Damocles over your head. That one false move, one giant mistake, and you could be set back a week, which might cost you your job, or even worse, you could wash out completely. And as I said, this was the most intense, stressful period of my entire life. I can't imagine adding being transgender on top of that and going through that experience. To me, that sounds like an unnecessary additional stressor that is a recipe for disaster to the transgenders. Now, I could be wrong on this, and everybody who wants to enlist as a transgender could make it through just fine without anybody even realizing they're transgender, or they could just not care what other people think and vice versa. But that is but one reason. I still have 2 more to go, and I only need one valid reason to establish my case that transgenders are not a good fit for the military. My second argument was concerning deployments. Now, I'm not sure of the ramifications or side effects of stopping HRT abruptly, like what could happen in a deployment environment. I do know that if they stop taking HRT, they will revert back to more of how they were before they started the HRT. I also know that someone who is going through HRT experiences tremendous emotional and mental changes. Now, I know I'm comparing HRT to things like HIV and diabetes, and I understand that there is not the same risk factor. Now, I doubt that if a person stops HRT, they will die because of it. So in that regard, it's not like HIV or diabetes. However, I do think that this could have detrimental effects on the effectiveness of the deployed unit. If a transgender person starts reverting due to the lack of HRT, their uniforms may no longer fit or become out of regs where they would normally be in regs. Say a person is female to male, and they are not able to get their HRT while deployed, and their testosterone levels lower enough where they have a hard time carrying their gear or operating the heavy machinery that they're supposed to do as part of their deployment. Certain jobs in the military require a person is able to lift a certain amount, and if a transgender person is only able to reach that minimum because of their HRT, they may not be able to continue to perform that operation while deployed. Conversely, what if the person is male to female? and they start detransitioning. They may begin to grow their facial hair back, then their gas mask may not seal correctly and they may not even realize it. The examples I mentioned may sound like minor gripes, but when you are deployed, this could mean the difference between life and death for these people, especially the gas mask. An additional detriment to the transgender person is if they are not able to maintain HRT while deployed, they may start to lose all of the progress they made while on HRT, and it will most likely take them longer to regain that progress than it took to lose it. Also, if they are captured on the battlefield and are imprisoned, that could be years that they go without their HRT. I don't have statistics to back this up, but I can all but guarantee a 0% chance that a transgender person will receive HRT while imprisoned in an enemy camp. And to be fair, given our current military situation, it is more likely that the transgender person would be deployed to a theater of war versus ISIS or a similar group who would kill them just for being trans. If that transgender person is lucky, it will be a swift death, not being stoned or burned alive or beheaded or tortured before they're killed. I am not saying that cis people will not have a hard time being imprisoned and that it will be peachy for them and they'll basically be drinking Mai Tais. What I am saying is that the chances of survival in those hostile environments is greatly increased for a cis person over their transgender counterparts. There is another unique aspect to being trans that I have been unable to find very much information on, and that is how our allies view not only the military as a whole, but the trans people in particular when dealing with them. Would a Muslim interpreter willingly work with someone that they know is openly trans? Would they react to them the same way? Would they treat them the same? How many of our allies would treat trans people with the dignity and respect that they deserve? I couldn't find any information on how many or which of the US's allies spoke positively about their acceptance of trans people in the service to begin with. My third and final reason that transgender people should not be accepted into the military is the overall cost they impose. And in order to lay out my case, I've got to go into a lot of numbers, so bear with me on this boring stuff. Now, there is a lot of information, numbers, and figures that I'm going to be going over, and it will sound like I'm refuting my own argument to begin with, but rest assured, I am going to get to my point. From the Military Times, the reports noted that an estimated $8 million per year that the Department of Defense will spend on healthcare for about 7,000 transgender troops. Now, there's more to that quote, but I'm stopping it there to make a point. I will deliver the entire quote so that way people won't say, oh, you're just taking that out of context and things along those lines. I just wanted to point out that $8 million divided by 7,000 people is approximately $1,143 annually per transgender service member. Now, let's go back to the full quote. The reports noted that the estimated $8 million per year that the Department of Defense will spend on healthcare for about 7,000 transgender troops is minuscule compared to how much the military spends to treat sexual dysfunction in men. The article goes on to state that Military Times first reported in 2015 that the Defense Health Agency the year before spent $84.2 million on erectile dysfunction medication for active duty troops, eligible families, and retirees. So what people are currently saying is that the military is spending on Viagra 10 times what the estimated cost to spend on transgenders would be. Well, that seems pretty open and shut to me. The financial cost for transgenders seems to be pretty minuscule, am I right? Well, except did you see what they kind of did there? For Viagra, they combined all active duty, their family members, and retirees into one lump. But when it comes to transgender individuals, they are only talking about active duty, as transgenders were not allowed to openly serve prior to 2016. In order to accurately compare apples to apples, I had to do a lot of digging. I spent way too much time shoveling through crap in order to get to the original Military Times article on Viagra.
Of transgender is insurance they were assigned at birth. So what does all of this mean? It means a lot in common. Most of them agree that being transgender
Trust me, dude. This is gonna be so worth it. You're gonna thank me later.
The original piece states, according to the data, active duty troops received just 102,885 scripts for ED meds, totaling $7.67 million. That is still a ridiculously high dollar amount for the military to be spending on ED medication, but did you hear how many people that was covering? 7.67 million divided by 102,000 is about $75 per person. Oh, what was the number for trans people again? Yeah, $1,143 per trans service member. And this is $75 per service member requiring ED medication. The cost difference between a transgender person and a person with ED ED serving in the military is $1,068 per person annually. I don't know about you, but going through my head right now,
one of these things is not like the others. One of these things doesn't belong.
Alright, so the other thing that people who are against Trump's ban don't consider is those are the current figures. So let's say that Trump didn't institute the ban, or that it is overturned, and we see an increase of 1,000 transgender people in the military. And likewise, we see an additional 5,000 cases of ED medication prescriptions in the military. So that is 5 times the growth. With those particular figures, you would see an increase of $1,143,000 for the annual treatment of transgender military members. That would increase the total cost for transgender healthcare to $9.14 million annually. Compare that to the increase that I said that was 5 times larger for those on ED medication. Their increase in cost annually would be $375,000. That would increase the total cost for the ED medication to $8.5 million annually. Okay, those aren't unreasonable figures, but let's say if that trend continued for the next 10 years, the total annual cost for transgender members for the military would increase to $20.6 million annually. The subsequent ED cost for active military members would be $11.8 million. Currently, both figures are fairly close to each other, but in the example that I just gave, the increase for the cost of transgender people would be $9 million more than the cost for ED medication. And that was with the number of cases of ED being 5 times greater than the number of transgender people. The 1,000 figure and the 5,000 figures were just placeholders. They were just to prove a point. They are not accurate by any means, but it is reasonable to expect both numbers to increase at some rate. In order for them to maintain a somewhat similar ratio, for every 1 trans person, 15 new cases of ED would have to be prescribed. Now, the entire reason that we are seeing all of these headlines comparing the cost of Viagra with the cost of transgenders is that these people are basically saying, see, you're already wasting money over there. You might as well waste money here. This is a classic example of 2 wrongs do not make a right. By pointing out that we are spending way too much on Viagra does not make it suddenly a good idea to spend more money on transgenders. This is something the left loves to do with their false dichotomies. They are completely ignoring that the DoD could stop funding both. That would free up $92 million of your hard-earned money that the government confiscated through taxes. While I was researching the military's ED expenses for active duty members, I stumbled across a Newsweek article that actually laid out a pretty good case as to why the military should be paying for these medications for our active duty men. The article states, a growing body of research that suggests around a third of post 9/11 veterans are likely to suffer from erectile dysfunction or other sexual problems. For men with combat PTSD, that figure is 3 times higher. Now, for me personally, I don't like the idea of charging the government for my medical expenses. I view those as my burden to bear, not the taxpayers. However, when it comes to these men, there seems to be a high correlation between their military service and their current medical condition, in which case I have no problem paying for their treatment. If their current medical condition is the direct result of their military service or is somehow associated with their military service, then I see no difference between paying for their ED medication than for paying for the treatment of anyone who has lost limbs or has been injured due to an IED while serving. That Newsweek article also stated concerning ED and PTSD that it might provide an answer to why, according to a 2016 study from the federal VA department, some 20 veterans commit suicide every day, around a fifth, 18% higher than the suicide rate of the civilian male population. This ties in closely with the last point that I will make for my video. The trans community already has a staggeringly high rate of suicide. 41% of trans people attempt suicide. The rate for the military in general is about 20 to 25% higher than the civilian population. Considering that the 41% suicide rate amongst the transgender community is mostly the civilian population, if you were to look at the transgender service members, their rate could exceed 50%. I don't like the thought of ending my video on such a downer, but that is where my research and reasoning have led me. In order to lighten the mood a little here at the end, here is another attempt at a movie quote / impression thing. Now, I look out there at all of you wonderful guys, and I say to myself, what I wouldn't give to be 20 years younger. And a woman. You know, I've personally flown over 194 missions. I shot down every one of them. Come to think of it, I've never landed a plane in my life.